Thank you. Guten Morgen, alles. So I did my little honors capstone, whatever you want to call it, concentration on the history of post-war Germany. Because today, Germany is divided, not by walls, not by politics, but by something that can't really be cured, and that is culture. Both Germanys, before unification, developed so vastly different from one another, and were basically completely different cultures at the time, and are now one country. And I've personally seen how this can go. I mean, Somalia, for example, was two completely different cultures merged together, and they're in perpetual war. So I feel like it's important to understand the background of Germany, specifically during the Berlin Wall, to understand how did this divide come to be, and how is it still affecting the divide of nation of Germany today. So without further ado, los geht's. So I'm going to go over a very brief history of Germany before the Berlin Wall, just to provide a little bit of background knowledge, and then we're going to go right into how they developed differently. So, beginning with Potsdam, 1945, the great powers were deciding, what do we do with Germany? The Western powers wanted to go easier on them because it was a weakened Germany by the Entente that made Hitler rise to power and conquer Europe. However, the East, knowing that Germany went through their lands and killed millions of people, wanted to punish the Germans severely for what they had done. So they came up with a compromise to split Germany into 4 different occupation zones. There was also the focus on demilitarizing Germany, which resulted in a lot of industry being destroyed or dismantled, and the denazification of Germany, which resulted in the Nuremberg trials to try German war criminals. On top of this, you also had a bunch of eastern land of Poland ceded. You don't really see it, but like east of the Soviet occupation zone, there's a region called Kashubia and Silesia and Eastern Prussia, which was split between Poland and the Soviet Union, and up to 8 million East Germans were either pushed into East Germany or amongst the Eastern Bloc. Now, going into immediately how they developed, West Germany did fairly well. The Allies wanted to build them up so that way they would be a great competitor in the war against communism, and so they won't have revanchist ideals that will cause a second Hitler to come to power. So they do things such as including Germany in the Marshall Plan to help them rebuild. They preserve native industries such as BMW and Volkswagen, so that way they can help boost that civilian economy. They introduced Gastarbeiter, or guest workers, because Germany around this time, a lot of their male workforce was either dead, injured, or Nazis. So they needed a lot more help, and thus workers from the Netherlands, Belgium, and France came there in order to help out and get work, because there was really nothing to do in post-war Europe. And all of this kind of led to something called the Wirtschaftswunder, or the German economic miracle, in which they reached an economy similar to their pre-war economy, which was quite impressive. East Germany, however, got suppressed. The Soviets wanted to rebuild their country and make the Germans pay for what they had done. So they dismantled a third of East Germany's industry and brought it back to the Soviet Union. And along with that, up to about a third of Germany's workers back to help rebuild. And any revolts or protests against these actions were met with brutal military crackdown, with all this kind of resulting in something called the Republikflucht, or escape from the Republic, in which tens of thousands of Germany's intellectuals and workforce fled to West Germany, either through Berlin or the main border, causing the Soviets to put up the Berlin Wall in August of 1961. So now we're going to go into the specifics of both these. There's a bunch of politics here that I'm not going to get too into, so long story short, initially West Germany was led by the CDU, or the Christian Democratic Union, a Christian conservative organization headed by Konrad Adenauer, which existed for a while and then collapsed when Konrad stepped down, resulting in the Social Democratic Party winning in 1969 under Willy Brandt, who introduced something called Neue Ostpolitik, which is basically the reapproachment with East Germany, kind of dropping claims to them so that way they could trade and just have better relations with the Eastern Bloc overall. On top of this, you also had the official acknowledgement of Nazi war crimes in West Germany to kind of show how bad the Nazis were with the second Nuremberg trials. And during this time, you also had the rise in leftist movements, such as the Green Party reaching brand new heights and large-scale protests that were for nuclear disarmament on both sides, the anti-war movement in Vietnam during the time, along with the anti-Nazi and anti-tradition protests also occurring. While all this was happening, the German economy was facing a new issue. The Wirtschaftswunder was slowing down. It was not as big as that used to be before the Berlin Wall and needed a fix. So a creator called Walter Eucken came up with the social market economy. He also came up with the centralized bank. And with the social market economy, it's pretty much the mix of free market capitalism with a government-funded social program involved, which was later implemented by Ludwig Erhard from 1963 to 1966 as chancellor. With this new program, there was better social welfare, there was a big crackdown on monopolies, and this kind of kept the Germany economy alive after the Wirtschaftswunder, and it's kind of the reason why Germany has one of the biggest economies today and is seen as such a great place to live. Now, East Germany. East Germany wanted to make it known that they were not Germany. They were a new country that was focused on progress and moving forward. So they dismantled a lot of their old legacy. Anything that was imperial, anything that was Nazi related was destroyed and violently repressed and replaced with reformists such as Karl Marx in terms of statues and posters and billboards and just trying to instill that we are a progressive state while violently repressing anyone who doesn't believe that. Speaking of which, the Nazi suppression, if any mention was made to Nazis or if there was anything left, they would violently repress it, kind of causing this underground neo-Nazi movement to rise because of how violent the East German government was, in the sense that life under Nazi Germany was comparatively better than that under East Germany's communist regime, which we'll see later. Also during this time, you had something called state atheism rise, in which, in order to combat religion in East Germany, implemented that program. And as you can see from this here, it was fairly successful, which we will talk about later. Going into the economy, East Germany had the best economy in the Eastern Bloc. However, it was still fairly not impressive by today's standards. They used a centrally planned economy in which the government controlled everything. Supply and demand, like the interest in things, along with just a lot of other stuff. It was completely inflexible and used for political gain and political gain alone. On top of this, Germany was extremely high in terms of dependency on imports because a lot of their industry had been destroyed and they were mostly an agrarian country by this point. Some minor reforms were introduced, such as something called the second pay packet, which was basically the subsidizing of things for East Germans, but you gotta remember, demand was decided by East Germany. So, yeah. You also had the absolute collapse of the Ostmark. It was fairly worthless, so people reverted back to doing things such as bartering and using foreign currencies like the ruble because they were just better overall. You also had the rise of grain markets through this time, which, kind of like I said before, East Germany controlled everything. Supply and demand made it impossible. As you can kind of see here, there were bread lines, there was decades of waiting for like a car, for example. So grain markets would provide that supply that was actually wanted for an extra price because this wasn't officially mandated by the government. So now we're getting into the fun part, unification. So by 1989, the Eastern Bloc was unraveling. Perestroika and glasnost had been introduced in the Soviet Union, and Gorbachev has pulled all soldiers out of East Germany that were occupying it. And there was a lot of sparks across the Eastern Bloc, but the one for East Germany was the faking of the 1989 DDR elections. Big shocker, communists don't have free elections. So as a result, a lot of East Germans saw this as the final straw and wanted to flee. The first one being through Hungary, because Hungary recently had opened its borders with Austria, and Austria had opened its borders with West Germany. And as a direct result, 25,000 East Germans went on vacation to Hungary to cross into Austria and then into West Germany. And there was a small encampment on the border because initially they weren't allowed, but then later the Hungarian Prime Minister finally folded and about 25,000 fled into Austria and then into West Germany. And this got even worse when a couple months later, Czechoslovakia completely opened its borders with West Germany, causing an additional 30,000 to flee over to West Germany. Meanwhile, at home, it was probably even worse, in which over 300,000 people were protesting the East German government in cities such as Berlin and Leipzig, calling for free elections and unification with the West. The government initially tried to quell this by introducing a Land Travels Bill, which was overwhelmingly shot down by the Volkskammer, or the East German parliament. And thus, as a direct result, the East German cabinet completely resigned and the border was completely open. And on the 9th of November, 1989, the Berlin Wall finally fell. This doesn't signify the complete unification yet because free elections were finally held, and in the March of 1990, the Alliance for Germany wins the election, which promises a quick and speedy reunification with the West, which is achieved in the 3rd of October 1990 when East and West Germany unite, and the coined term Die Wende, or the turning point, is marked. However, not everyone was super happy about this unification. Going very briefly over foreign responses, Europe was fairly scared of this. Both Germanys were extremely powerful in their own respective spheres, and there were fears that a new unified Germany would dominate Europe economically and power Hungary would possibly become a Fourth Reich. Internally, it was extremely divided based on age and wealth gaps, in which you had the old and wealthy supporting this unification, with younger and more poor people opposing it, mostly because of all the money that would need to be funneled into East Germany to help it rebuild. Not about culture, because like I said at the beginning, Germany was so divided culturally during this time that the two countries were pretty much not the same in the slightest. And thus there was a lot of violence as a direct result. And East Germans also saw this too as a threat. Some East Germans saw this as a second Anschluss or an annexation by West Germany, feeling completely underrepresented, coining the term Mauer im Kopf, or the wall in the head, in which while Germany is united today, it is pretty much divided in all but name. So now I'm going to get into the real divide that has happened today in Germany, which I'll be covering stuff such as the culture, the economics, the politics, and the religion. So starting off, a lot of cultural hatred. Kind of like how we refer to Northerners as being like these rude, impatient people, and they refer to us as being like these Southern hillbilly rednecks. It's kind of the same in Germany, in which we have these derogatory terms coined for former East Germaners called Ossis, and former West Germaners called Wessis.
And Aussie is derogatory, I would add. As is, they call Americans Amis. Ami.
Yeah, it's interesting, but you know, Aussies were referred to be these racist, these poor, these Russian-loving people, you know, horrible things. And Westies were referred to be these snobs, these rich people, these selfish people who were completely dishonest. And you had East Germans still feeling suppressed by West Germany. They had little to no power in the government at the time, you know. They had a horrible economy, they had barely any population, they were mostly agrarian. They pretty much couldn't stand up to West German power. Now to the economy. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of these maps before, and I'm going to explain each and every one of them. Well, like 3. So, yeah, initially, East Germany had a fairly good rise in their GDP, you know, with all this new money coming in from West Germany. However, there was a bunch of unions existing in West Germany at the time that demanded these fairly high wages from like their workers, along with a bunch of benefits which East Germany just couldn't afford in their current state. And as the direct result, tens of thousands of East German workers went to the West for better job opportunities, leaving East Germany economically destitute with a lacking of industry or anything of that matter. Nextly is religion. As you can kind of see, there is a mixture of Protestant Catholicism still existent in the West, but as you can see in the East, there is no religion left. That state atheism program did its toll, and still has its effect on Germany today, with a little over half of Germany's youths being atheists. And you can see in major cities such as Frankfurt and Hamburg, they have become atheists too, and there are fears that Germany could become a majority atheist state by 2030.
And I would just add there, Carl, when I lived in former East Germany, Lutherstadt-Wittenberg, which is where Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation, where he nailed the theses to the door, people are not religious, and that is because of communism leadership for so long.
Yeah, it's so ironic too, because Germany used to be like the epicenter of a religion. You know, it was the home place of the Holy Roman Empire, you know, the Protestant Reformation. It's just like this big turning point for so many religions, and yet nowadays it's almost completely atheist. Finally, politics, which I'll try to cover as neutral as I can. You kind of have this swap in politics, in which you have the West Germany wanting to become a lot more progressive, you know, wanting a lot of reform, and thus turning to parties such as the Left Party, which is actually an East German party, which has become more mainstream, or Die Linke. And you also have the East wanting to become more conservative, trying to forget the Soviet oppression that they'd experienced just 30 years prior with parties such as Alternative für Deutschland, which is a right-wing populist party. However, you do have some figures trying to fix this and bend the rift between, you know, politics and culture, such as figures Angela Merkel. She is East German born. She was the first chancellor of this unified Germany, who did a lot of progress in terms of helping with this inner reunification. So overall, why is this important? Why am I going off on you today about Germany and history? Well, the thing is that Germany is extremely diverse in its history, and it's still pretty much divided in all but name, in which no matter where you are in Germany, whether it be East or West, it's going to have its effects. Every person that had lived in the country at the time had experienced it in one way or another, and it's still very prevalent in the minds of Germans. It was only 30 years ago. So overall, if you ever do travel to Germany, just keep these in mind and just understand the diversity of Germany today and how it makes it, you know, special, and how we can acknowledge history while embracing it at the same time. Danke und auf Wiedersehen.
Give him a hand. Excellent. Excellent. That's a lot of hard work, and Carl was finished with this midterm, mid-semester. I've never seen that happen.
I was in the library for weeks.
Yeah.
I just love the topic, honestly. I love history. I love learning more about it. So I was just in Hunter for like a weekend or 2 or 3 and just doing this because I actually showed a lot of interest in it. It was really interesting, some of the research that I've done.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
Carl, have you been to Germany yet?
I have not, but next summer I plan on going.
Excellent. Would you go to the Stuttgart program or on your own?
I'm either going with the Stuttgart program, or I know there's one that, like, I think it's Dr. Gruber, Professor Gruber. He does one with the education group to Ludwig, in which we work with, which they work with like a bunch of elementary schools and do a bunch of other tours to like Nuremberg, München, Prague. I'm either going to go on that one or the Stuttgart expedition. So.
Great, great. You could just leave that up and I'll get it, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, always